Good afternoon and welcome everybody to this CY Development Program panel on defining and developing a professional brand. We have an excellent group of panelists for today's topic. But before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to let the audience know of the format for this session. We'll first hear remarks from the panelists. I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to hear their remarks. And then we are going to ask a question to each, and then move on to a Q&A session. Please write any questions you may want to ask in the chat. Shirley and Satya are going to be monitoring that chat for us. And so thank you, Shirley and Satya, for your help with this. Please mute your mics while panelists are presenting, and just let's begin by briefly introducing the panelists. So first we have Seanicaa Herron, a pioneer and trailblazer. She's a respected agricultural economist with 20 years of experience, spanning across the academic, private, and government sectors. Seanicaa was the first Black woman to serve as an agricultural economist for the USDA World Agricultural Outlook Board, University of Missouri-Columbia Commercial Agricultural Program, and Informa Economics. She's a former USDA radio contributor on livestock markets and weekly briefings to the USDA Secretary of Agriculture, chief economist, and top officials. Seanicaa now serves as founder and executive director of Fredman Hears Foundation, Inc., a nonprofit organization focusing on connecting Black farmers with the marketplace and providing access to technical assistance, capital, and new market opportunities. Dr. David R. Just is a well-recognized scholar. He's made excellent contributions in important research areas spanning from food security to alternative sources of energy. He's mentored a large number of junior faculty and graduate students, and he's known as a champion of behavioral tools. He's a leader in the profession and source of information to the general public, policymakers, and scholars. He received his PhD and a PhD and master's in agricultural and resource economics from the University of California, Berkeley, and a bachelor's degree in economics from Brigham Young University. He is the Susan Eckert Lynch Professor of Science and Business in the Charles H. Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management, and coordinator for the Applied Economics and Policy Unit in the Cornell S.C. Johnson College of Business. Dr. Elena Irwin is a renowned expert in the areas of sustainable communities, energy, and environmental health. She's a distinguished professor at Ohio State University and faculty director of the Ohio State Sustainability Institute. Dr. Irwin has secured over $19 million in research funding from organizations like the National Science Foundation and USDA. As an expert in her field, she's served on various national research committees, such as the Agricultural Science Committee in the U.S. EPA's Science Advisory Board, and as an AAEA Fellow. Sorry. She holds a PhD in agricultural and resource economics from the University of Maryland, and bachelor's in German and history from Washington University in St. Louis. So thank you, panelists, for agreeing to do this for us. Let's start with your remarks. Seanicaa, please start.
All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you to everybody that's joining us and for taking time out of your day to learn a little bit more about professional branding. So when we were initially asked to do this webinar series, I thought it was very interesting because I had never thought of professional branding in the way that we're going to present it today. And as I had time to think about it, I wish I would have had something like this when I was, first starting my professional career to help me kind of hone in and have steps and strategies and understanding the lay of the land. So I'll start off first by wanting to like level set and thinking about branding, because now we live in an age where everything is about branding and putting yourself out there and having this message and knowing who you are. But I think the most important thing from a professional standpoint, such as ourselves, specifically when we're getting out of grad school and we're thinking about what direction we want to go, we have to keep the end in mind. Before you can develop any type of personal brand or strategy or game plan, you have to know what it is you want to do, who you want to be, and what you want to accomplish. So that is the first step. And I want to use a metaphor of Nike. Everybody knows what Nike is, whether you see the symbol or you see the word Nike, but the tagline is the pure branding and marketing genius. We all know Nike, just do it. No matter where you go, it's universal, it's global. And so when we're thinking about our own professional brand, it should be who we are as we show up authentically, but also what's the tagline that goes along with that. And so understanding, I think that comes with understanding who you are first and what you want to do. And once you do that, the next steps would be more so thinking through, okay, how do I get there? And how do I show up and be myself regardless? One of the most important things, as I've had time to do a little bit of research about marketing and branding, because they go hand in hand, is that there has to be a clear understanding of how you want to show up, and showing up authentically works way better than trying to be someone else. I know, especially for us academics, and I'm going to pick on the economists in the audience, is that a lot of times we're trained under people that already have a name for themselves and they have a network and they have spent time helping us to cultivate our profession. And sometimes we want to move into the world in a space just like them. And it's not necessarily a copycat, but it's more so of, I think in a way giving honor to the people that have helped you, but we're not sure of ourselves when we first leave grad school and going into our professional careers. So showing up authentically is a key component of having a successful brand and knowing who you are. And then I would also, like for us to think in terms of the message that we want to employ and the message that we want to have out there wherever we go, showing up as, oh, I'll just use my name for example. Seanicaa, I know that she's an ag economist and one of her areas of expertise is production agriculture. Having that level of confidence in knowing who you are so that when people see your name or people are looking for folks, they can say, hey, I know Seanicaa, let me connect you with her. All of that comes in a space of being strategic with your branding. Behind the scenes of all of that is, I think the most important thing is developing a spirit of excellence in the work that you do. When you know what it is you want to do and you're clear on that, operating in a level of being the best at that, knowing what it is in all areas of that particular sphere that you're going to be working in. Again, I'll use ag economics. For me, I um, tried my hardest to always know what's going on in ag, staying up on the news, staying up on how things are being impacted. When something happens with supply, how does that affect demand? Always having an answer to a question or being willing to do the research to get that done all became a part of my professional brand. Now, at the time, I didn't know that. Again, branding, that wasn't a term that we were using for it. But now that I look back over my professional career, I can see where that was all shaping me along the way of having a consistent brand. The second part is being consistent, being a person that can be relied upon, to follow through, to give your best in everything that you're doing. And I will say, again, for us academics and folks, we tend to, it's very competitive. I'm not it's a lot of ag economists, it's a lot of researchers, it's a lot of people that are, we're competing against. But I would like to say we should probably reframe it. and not necessarily looking at it in a sense of competition, but looking at it in a sense of camaraderie, meaning there's enough room for all of us at the table. And so therefore, it's okay for me to show up as my authentic self and anyone else that's in that area of ag economics because we're all bringing different perspectives. That's another key with branding. Going back to my Nike example, we know who Nike is, but that Nike is not stopping Reebok. It is not stopping Adidas. It's not stopping New Balance. They all have their own brands, but they're all tennis shoe companies. So even with each of us in our respective careers, there are people that we look up to, that there are people that we aspire to have the same level of expertise that they are at. However, it's important to remember that even though there are all of these different people in the space, it's okay to show up who you are as who you are and do the work that you can do, and you will still get the same level of recognition and success. I don't look at success in a sense of always having to be on a flyer or always being asked to speak or always wanting to be at the forefront of everything that's going on. Success in our career is longevity, making sure that we understand and that we're providing a value to not only our colleagues but society as a large in the work that we're doing, and making sure that that work is true to who we are and the foundational principles that we have as professionals. And I think that those are all starting points in thinking about branding yourself and how that works. Now, I will say an area that I can say for me that I'm starting to understand better. And as we move forward in the world, we're more technologically advanced and understanding the component of social media and how that plays into your brand and being consistent and getting your work out there and knowing how to engage with people on a level that's not always in person, not always at meetings and networks, but also from a social standpoint of making sure that our work has an audience outside of our colleagues. That is going to be very important for branding. I think going forward, the technological component is not going to go away. And I think professional branding for all of us is going to be very important because now enter the chat AI. And so we have to make sure that we're in a position where we are thought leaders, as I said, consistent, operating in a level of excellence so that yes, AI can be a tool, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that people are seeking us out for answers, for thoughts, for conversations, for discussions, as opposed to asking a question in AI. So as we think about professional branding, in terms professionally, I think it's also ever evolving. We won't ever just get there. If you look at my example with Nike again, where they started versus where they are now, they've evolved and continue to evolve and will evolve in our professional careers. When I graduated from grad school over 20 years ago, I never would have expected I would be where I am now. However, being able to evolve and pivot and understand that it was okay to say, okay, I don't like this area, but let me go to this area, but still remain true to who I was, allowed me to experience levels of success. And with that branding at the time, there were continual doors of opportunity for me to learn and to obtain exposure, of which I was able to take advantage of. And it has been a very exciting journey for me, a very exciting career. And as I said at the top of the call, I didn't know it was called branding at the time. I just thought it was me trying to figure out where I fit in the world and what I wanted to do professionally. Now that the terminology is there and looking at it from not only the perspective of our professional careers, but even just out in the private sector and marketing geniuses and how they do things, I see the importance of it and how it is going to help continue to shape careers professionally. So the great thing for everybody on the call today is you have a jump start. You start thinking about it now. You don't have to wait and kind of waddle through the mud and figure it out on your own. The steps and strategies that we all will talk about in our journeys can help kind of kickstart you and to help you figure this thing out a little bit faster than we did. And with that being said, I am not going to monopolize the beginning of the call, so I will turn it over to my colleagues, and I look forward to a healthy discussion later on when we get into the questions.
So David, you can start
Yes.
with your remarks. You can share PowerPoints if you have, and then we move on with Elena's.
Sure. So, yeah, I'm debating whether to share my slides. They're not extremely useful, but let me give them anyway. So building a little bit off of what Seneca was talking about, to think about having a personal brand, what's the purpose of a brand in general? And really, the purpose of a brand is all about the audience, right? It's all about the audience. When you create a brand, you're creating a brand so that it can distinguish your company or in this case, yourself from others, your competitors within a particular marketplace or a particular arena. So you distinguish yourself from others, and you're going to do that by the types of characteristics that you are going to be known for. And the value of a brand, having done a little bit of work in marketing, I think it's worth talking about what that value is in this venue. That value can be generated or be measured, I should say, in a couple of different ways. One way that's not particularly relevant here is how much could you sell the brand for if you really wanted to. I don't think that works with a personal brand. But perhaps a more useful way of thinking about it is brand equity. It's the value of the brand to the customers or the consumers, right? And in this case, it's important to think about who is the audience that you're trying to create this brand for, and what type of value are you trying to create for them in distinguishing yourself and in painting yourself with some sort of distinguishing marks or distinguishing characteristics in your work and your body of well, in my case, research. And so, given this sort of framework, I want to talk to you a little bit about my own sort of strategy. And again, like Seneca, I sort of fell into this. There are parts of this that are intentional and parts of this that were completely unintentional. And so I don't want to talk like I really knew what I was doing. But I think what came out of it has been very useful. Very early on, I identified for myself that really I wanted to, I defined my audience as the AAA, and that was the group that I really wanted to define myself for, so that they could recognize who I was and what it was that I did, and the types of work I do and the type of thoughts that I have, if you will. And there were some early pieces of this that were very prominent and very deliberate. Early on, I knew from, even while doing my dissertation, I wanted to do behavioral work. That was something that fascinated me. So I knew that had to be part of it. And I also really enjoyed work on risk. And there's a huge literature on behavioral risk, and it was one that I wanted to engage. So that's how I sort of saw myself starting out my career, doing things in behavioral risk. And how did I go about trying to define myself and paint something that looked something like a brand? Well, my first step and the first things that were really sort of deliberate were trying to find very prominent venues where I could present my work and present where there would be an audience that was interested and that found it as something new and fresh. And my initial strategy, I would put together plenary sessions at conferences, and I would put those sessions together intentionally, asking very prominent people who work in risk to present papers next to mine, so that the room would be packed, and initially packed with people who were there not for me, but for the other people who were there speaking, and I'd get a little bit of an audience and be able to speak. And to the extent that I could put something together that was fresh and new in their mind, that was something that was really useful. In addition to that, going to some of the conferences that were topical in this area, there's the regional risk group that used to meet in Gulf Shores, I think now meets in Kansas City. I would go there every year and present, and they would be familiar with my work. These are all things that are going to be helpful if you're planning on going up for tenure at some place. Having people who know what you're doing and understand you. I guess I would say this is an exercise in building a personal brand that's actually very useful in that vein. Of course, you want to publish papers that sort of get into your unique perspective, and you want those papers to display something. You can use co-authors and do a lot of different work, but it needs to have some sort of theme, something that people can identify and say, this is that person's influence on this. So it sort of helps. I would say the most exciting opportunities I got to publish that I think were most useful in doing something like this are invited papers, because there you have much more freedom to do something that really is uniquely you, and the reviewers have a lot less ability to push back and say, this is not a valid thought, or not a valid way of looking at things, because you're allowed in some of these invited papers to express an opinion and not simply identify the results of a study. There's some synthesizing going on. I'll also mention, I think part of what was useful is, there were plenty of folks coming into this who were not particularly receptive to a behavioral perspective when I was at least starting. That's not necessarily as true now. And I won't name names, but I can remember when people would cite my work and do so negatively in order to push back on this. And I thought that was really useful, actually, from my perspective, because, hey, this is a good opportunity to set up the next sort of plenary session that I think a lot of people would be really interested in. Let me invite this guy to speak in the same session as me and ask him to present these criticisms. And I was able to get, get some things, some venues like that together that were really useful in letting this individual, and actually was able to do this a couple of times, speak what their criticism was, and also get them to identify the pieces of what I was proposing that they actually agreed with, that they thought were useful. It created much more of a dialogue than it did, just this simple pushback, and I think was advantageous for both of us. And again, created some interest from outside. One of the questions we were asked in putting this together is, when did we know that we had a brand? Well, that's a really good question. Maybe last week, to a certain extent, but I relate it to an experience I had in grad school, where you start out and you're trying to learn everything, and you go to your professors and you ask questions nonstop, and you try and learn everything they have there. And some point in grad school, at least for me, and I think it happens for most people, at some point along the way, while I was doing my dissertation, some faculty member comes into my office to ask me questions about what I was doing. And they had some idea of what I knew and what I was gaining an expertise in. And that was really shocking to me. That it was, it sort of shook the way I thought about the world. At the same time, I think that's sort of when you realize things are working for setting out a personal brand, is when you start getting invitations to present or for different sorts of opportunities to put in grant proposals or invited papers or other things like that, where they're identifying you because of the work you've done. It's clear that you've made some sort of dent. And for me, I think what did that was I got this email from, it was from ERS, about a grant that they were looking for proposals in behavioral economics specifically. And I looked at the list of names on this email, and it was really bizarre. It was like literally, at this point, these people all have Nobel Prizes, and then it was me. And I realized they put me on this list because they know I know behavioral economics, not because I'm anywhere as well known as any of these folks. They probably, I'm not known. I'm an unknown relative to them, but they know that I'm interested in behavioral economics, and so I must have been successful, at least in putting that forward. And it was also a great opportunity because I recognized none of those other names were going to apply to this grant. So it was a very good opportunity for me. You also get students, grad students, starting to, come to you and talk to you because they're interested in your work. It's when it starts to pay off really that you know that it worked. I guess, yeah, I'll probably just leave it there, but I will say, I don't know that you need to be extremely intentional about all of this, because I certainly wasn't, but at least at some points you need to be strategic in trying to put this all together. I'll quit there and let Elena take over.
Great, thank you, David, and thank you, Seanicaa. And thank you all for this opportunity. This is really fun, actually. And like both Seanicaa and David said, when I first started thinking about this, and when Jamille and Satya approached us to ask us, how do we define our professional brand? I honestly had never thought about this question before. And so it's been fun actually to reflect on this and realize that I've actually thought about this question quite a lot, just not exactly in those terms. And I suppose the way that I've put it to myself is it's really about professional soul searching. Who am I professionally? Who do I want to be? And then we could go even deeper than that and say things like, what is my contribution and what is my purpose? And how do and I think the place where I start with that is, how do I bring my authentic self to what I do? And so that's kind of my first thing as I was reflecting on this, that I realized is, for me, and I think Seanicaa was saying this as well a lot, is it's really about who you are, in bringing your authentic self to your professionally, to your career, and to what you do. And so for me, as I reflect on that, I am a very purpose-driven person. Or mission-driven would be another way to say it. I've had a lifelong passion for environment and environmental issues. And just, I think part of that was shaped by growing up in a very rural, I grew up in West Virginia with natural beauty all around me. But I also saw a lot of environmental destruction, and poverty and health impacts, all of which come with a coal-based extractive economy. And I think all of that, early on fueled my a lifelong interest and really passion, not only for the environment, but also for people, and for the balance between environment and people, and for those equity aspects as well. And so essentially for sustainability, although of course at the time I didn't really know what that word was, or what it meant. But as I look back on what I've done, throughout my career, sustainability is definitely a through line for me, in terms of the work I've done, both in multiple different kinds of activities and roles in my profession. And so that's kind of the second thing that I wanted to say is, figure out what your through line is. And I like the word through line because you can do a lot of different things, and should explore and do a lot of different things, and should be willing to take some risks, some calculated risks. And, failure is not a bad thing. We can learn a lot from failure. Perhaps that's a theme we can come back to. But in all of this, there's usually a through line of something, all right, if we're being authentically true to ourselves. And I think that through line is really important, because sometimes when we get lost along the way, and this has certainly been true for me, being able to go back to my through line and recognize that this is really why I'm doing this. This is my motivation for doing this. And so having a clear through line, I think, for your professional goals, for your career, can be really very, very helpful. The other thing I would say is that, kind of as a mission-oriented person, for me at least, it's the what comes first, and then the how comes second. And that certainly was true for me, just in terms of how I chose the profession of economics. I was first interested in environmental problems, and then I came to economics as a useful framework. And having said that, I'm really super happy I did choose economics, because it's been a very useful framework for looking at all these things. But it's maybe a slightly different way of approaching a career choice. And what if you listen to my bio, you may have heard that as an undergraduate, I was a German and history double major. So not exactly the best preparation for becoming a PhD economist. But on the other hand, it gave me a different perspective. I think it allowed me to think outside the box a little bit. And I think kind of, in general, having this broader interest in sustainability, but bringing it through with the lens of economics, has allowed me to think out a little bit outside the box and be a little bit different. And so that would be the third thing I would say is, once you kind of figure out who is your authentic self and what is your through line, be comfortable with that, own it, be comfortable being who you are. And, it's inevitably going to make you somewhat different than the people around you. And that's okay. And that's good. And I think it particularly comes with, when you're more problem oriented versus discipline oriented in terms of how you orientate your thinking and your goals. I think the other thing that I would say about that is, for me at least, that has led me to do a lot of interdisciplinary work. And that's also a setting where, you have to be really comfortable being different. It turns out that economists don't have the greatest reputation among a lot of other scientists, whether they're ecologists or other social scientists. And so it takes work to convince people that, that you really are a friendly, open-minded economist. And that's been hard at times. But there's also, it's been really valuable too, because I've been able to clearly demonstrate what my contribution is. And I think that is another point that I wanted to make, which is that, we often find ourselves working on teams and collaborating, and that's great. And, I think particularly in our work, collaboration is super important. But at the same time, you don't want to lose who you are. And so being clear about what your contribution is, even in the most interdisciplinary setting or the most disciplinary of settings, what is it that you are bringing to the table? What is it that you're contributing? And I think that is really important to people recognizing that. And that's part of defining your brand. The last thing I wanted to say is that, kind of David was saying this too, that recognize that defining your brand, it certainly happens in many purposeful ways. It also happens in a lot of accidental ways, and sometimes more out of necessity than out of choice. And so as I was thinking about this, an experience came to mind that I was kind of looking back on my younger days as I was an assistant professor. And I realized that this was an example, and I wanted to share it with you all, the example of branding kind of coming out of necessity, and having to, having in our cases, having to defend perhaps our work. As an assistant professor, I was attending a big annual regional urban economics conference, and I had the opportunity to present work that directly contradicted a paper that had just been published in QJE on urban sprawl. And the co-authors of that paper, they were from fancy places, like London School of Economics and other places. And they happened to be in the same session that I was going to be presenting my paper in that contradicted their findings that had just been published, and they were publishing some of their follow-up, or they were presenting some of their follow-up work. And then just to add, cherry on top, they were very arrogant. And I knew that going in. And so to say I was a little bit nervous about the whole situation would be an understatement. But the thing is, and what I realized, and thankfully I realized this before I actually had to present, is that I knew their data and I knew my data, and I knew my data was better. And I didn't try to do anything too fancy. I presented the data, I presented the images, the maps, along with my econometric analysis, and literally let the data speak for itself. And the conclusions were clear, and they pushed back hard, but it was clear to everyone in the room that they had pushed their questioning beyond what the data could support. And looking back on that, it wasn't a pleasant experience, but it really helped me to establish myself among that community as a spatial land use economist. And that's kind of been part of my brand all along in terms of sustainability science, in particular, looking at land use and spatial economics. And so that was a really defining moment for myself. So that was the last point I wanted to make, is that sometimes when you define your brand, it happens perhaps out of necessity, or you got to kind of stand up to something, defend yourself. And those are also can be really defining moments as well. So I think I'll stop there and turn it back to Jamille.
Wow, your insights, all of you, have been great in here. I have several notes that I want to kind of summarize what you brought up. So I like what David said about the audience, the importance of focusing on the audience, thinking about prominent venues, thinking about coming up with opportunities to present your work with people that either have criticized your work or are experts in the areas. I also want to kind of applaud Seanicaa's remarks when talking about being confident and talking about being confident in your expertise, but also have the end in mind, and bringing the Nike examples were really great. Also for Elena, thank you for talking about how passion is important in developing an identity and the importance of being unique. So those are some of the notes that I made. I have more notes, but I think I have to move on to kind of ask questions directly to the panelists. We have some questions for you that are already prepared. So let's start with David. So, with Seanicaa. So could you please describe some strategies? You mentioned something that was really interesting. You said something about longevity, right? The success is more like you have to see success as longevity. So I want to ask you, could you please describe or expand on some strategies that are more targeting the long run identity, right? More intentional investments that we can do to keep our brand strong for years to come.
Absolutely. I like talking points, so I'm gonna give us 3. The first one I think is consistency. And David and Elena both touched on that with, being consistent, even if it's not popular or if it's someone who is opposing your work, but being consistent in your work and continuing to do the work, even if it gets uncomfortable. The second one would be, what is your value proposition? What about you or me brings value to the space or the profession, or whatever it is that we are presenting to society as a whole? What is the value of that, or what do you want the value to be? I think that's very important. And again, as David mentioned, I kind of stumbled upon that. I'm gonna say like 5 years ago, actually, when I was at a very critical point in my career, deciding which way I wanted to go now. And I had to sit down and think through, okay, what value am I bringing to the space? And what value do I want to continue to bring to the space over the next 10 years or so? Those answers were actually two totally different answers also. So that kind of goes back into being able to pivot. And I would say, lastly, mentorship has been so critical to my longevity um, in the profession. In ag economics, I have had some great mentors, some of which were grad school professors that have helped me navigate professional nuances, but also mentors outside of the space. Because as Elena said, as economists, sometimes we can get into groupthink, and because we're trained to think a certain way about problems, we approach everything in a systematic way. And so having mentors that are in other professions, in other fields, that have had a level of success, and also that have a brand, has allowed me to understand and approach questions, problems, my work in different ways, and have also provided me with different strategies that have helped me tremendously along my professional career. So again, I would say consistency, what is your value proposition, and mentorship. Don't be afraid to ask someone that you don't know for mentorship. Uh, I mean, it's great to have people that you know and love, but you also need somebody that's going to challenge you and that's going to actually help you to think and look at things differently.
Excellent, excellent. All right, David, I have a question prepared here for you. Have you ever experienced shifts in your career? I think you have talked a little bit about, focusing on audiences and things like that. I already kind of summarized some of the notes I have for you, but I wonder if you ever had to kind of shift your career, if you faced challenges that made you make a turn, right? A pivotal decision that involved risk. And since you are also an expert in risk, I want to ask you, how do you recommend us to, when we are faced with pivotal moments, right, where we have to do a turn or take a turn, how do you weigh the cost of, those changes, those shifts?
So yeah, those are both very good questions. Maybe I'll take them in reverse order. Uh, Thinking about weighing those shifts, I mean, there is a potential cost, particularly early on in your career, to doing something that dilutes your brand or makes it so it's unclear to your audience what it is you do and what you're valuable for. There is that risk, and it's one that you should take seriously, because I've seen several people who have had very difficult time when it comes to pivotal points in their career being able to identify exactly what they're known for. And I do think it's worth trying to protect that to a certain extent. At the same time, I don't think that means that you need to define yourself very narrowly early in your career and just follow that path until death. I think there are opportunities to shift a bit. And I'll that opportunity that I mentioned from ERS, that was actually really pivotal, excuse me, pivotal for me. Don't need to add extra syllables. So it was a grant that was they were looking for somebody doing behavioral economics in food decision, and I had done a couple of things that were related to food, but they weren't sort of very central to my research at the time when I received that. But as I was reading through the grant and recognizing the grant call for grant proposals, and recognizing that I was, of the people on the email list they had sent it to, the most likely to apply, I started thinking about it and realizing, well, this is actually a great application of behavioral tools. Um, People make food decisions all the time. You can't invest huge amounts of cognitive effort into these decisions. They have to be influenced by behavioral, heuristics and things like that. The more and more I thought about it, the more and more I realized this actually is a great opportunity. And so I added it to what I do, right? And decided to pursue that path. And it worked out spectacularly. Now, what I first considered to be a hobby, a lot of people consider to be my main event, if you will. I think there are opportunities like that you need to pay attention to be at least somewhat flexible. I didn't fully abandon what I do, right? I'm still a behavioralist, but I did adapt to the opportunities that were in front of me.
The mouse sometimes gets on the other side of the screen and then I can't find the unmute button. But yeah, your points are great. Thank you for sharing. Let's move on to Elena. Elena, I have a question for you. You already mentioned that some of the strategies that you took to build your brand were not intentional, right? And some of them were intentional. So I just want you to kind of tell us a little bit more about the intentional strategies that you took, why did you take them, and if there are any specific strategies that you intentionally took to build your identity that you really want to stress out for people that are here starting their careers or moving or transitioning into, say, a new job, or they just got promoted and want to build from where they are. They are retiring and want to start something new. So what can you tell these folks in terms of the intentional strategies that they can start doing?
Yeah, thank you, Jamille. For me, it's always been a mix. But I think, for me, the biggest intention is figuring out what motivates me, and where do I get my energy, if I can figure that out, and if I can find a way to do that in a way that adds value, so to kind of lift up the point that Seanicaa was making, it's not just about you, right? It's about how you add value to what other people are doing as well. Then I think that is always been kind of what I come back to in terms of the intentionality of my choices and what really guides my choices. And so I think that is about knowing and being aware that, what you're really doing is trying to tell your story. And that if you don't take the opportunity to tell your story, someone else will tell your story, and they may not tell it in the way that you want, or in the fullest, right, way that is possible. And so I think in a lot of ways, that's really what we're talking about here, is like, how do you tell your story in ways that give you that power and don't give that power to someone else. There's a great one of my mentors here at OSU is in the Office of Academic Affairs, and he oversees promotion and tenure for the university, and it's a point that he makes often when he talks to junior faculty. He says, make sure you know how to tell your story and don't let other people tell your story. And he's saying it in the context of when we go through promotion and tenure and you have to write a dossier, it's an incredible opportunity to narrate your story. I never thought about it that way, and probably most of us don't, because it just seems just like the biggest pain in the butt to pull all this in. You just feel like you're staring at your navel the whole time and you just get sick of yourself, right? But it's just tedious and a lot of work. But on the other hand, it is a wonderful opportunity to tell your story. And so, I think I'm not saying that I necessarily did that very well, but over time, and having looked at a lot of dossiers now in my current role as Sustainability Institute Director, it really is a great opportunity. And so that's specific to academics. And so maybe not everyone has an analogous thing, but if you're in academics, thinking about your dossier and thinking about that as a way to brand yourself and narrate and tell your story, I think is a very important strategy.
Okay. Great points here to answer that question. So I have a question from the audience that kind of goes with what you were saying. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask it right now. It says, if my research interests are somewhat broad, how can we identify a clear and cohesive focus? I know you were talking about, looking at that dossier, and maybe some folks are starting working with the research agendas and trying to focus on something. So can you answer that question for us, any of you? But, Elena was just talking, so because we have 10 minutes, by the way, and there are like 3 questions from the audience that we would like to take. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And I think it's really important to figure out what that clear narrative is. Again, what I called kind of the through line. And it might be topical, right? It might be that, kind of what David was saying, that, what he's known for. It could be more mission oriented, like the kind of thing I was talking about. And it could be something that is, a deeper question that you're always asking, but maybe in different situations and with different instances or different applications. And so I guess for Carly, who asked this question, I would encourage her to reflect more deeply on what is the underlying thing about your interest in development and agriculture that brings that together? And that is kind of the common element of how you're approaching this. And I would bet that it's there. In fact, I'm sure it's there. And that's then the gives you kind of the backbone of how you build your narrative.
Yeah. Any other comments from Seanicaa or David on this topic?
I agree with Elena, and I really like the point about writing it down so that you can see, what is the bridge there. And after you get it out, like do a brain dump. Nobody has to read it but you. And then once you get it out, edit it several times until it's as concise as it needs to be, and you can rattle it off in the elevator. And then you have it. And once you get it, you'll always have it, and you'll be able to tweak it in ways that you need to, just depending on the conversation or who you're talking to. But I think the key is everything that Elena pointed out.
I absolutely agree. I also suffer from this problem of having broad interests. Part of my trick is just, and I don't know that my trick works, but part of my trick is just simply defining myself and selling myself as one piece of what I'm interested in, and here and there working on things that I'm not promoting quite as heavily.
And on that note, so let's move on to the next question here. I'm always not sure how to pitch what I work on, kind of overall, right? So do you have any thoughts on the importance of creating a clear narrative of your work, and any tips on, pitching what you're doing?
I think it depends on like the audience, who you're pitching it to. And so number one, define the audience. If y'all don't know, I'm an analytical thinker. I'm always gonna have 3 points. Number one, define the audience. Number two, after you define your audience, I think it's very important, again, to get it out on paper or whatever your thoughts are, so that you can see them and you can go back and edit what that is, because sometimes we have a tendency to think, oh, this is what I thought I was or wanted to do or how I wanted to pitch it. But once you actually get it on paper and you read it aloud, it's not resonating. So that's an exercise that has helped me tremendously. And then next, I would say practice pitching it. Sometimes we just afraid to pitch because we don't want to get rejected. Like, let's just be honest. We don't want to get rejected. We don't want to feel that people don't understand us or our work or what we're trying to convey. But the only way to get better at it is to just do it, and do it as many times as you need to, family, friends, but don't forget to keep the main thing in the profession is that you got to get out there and you got to pitch it to somebody in the profession and be able and open to accepting feedback, whether it's good or bad. You have to be able to take that feedback and use that as fuel to, make it better.
Yeah. All right, so it's 1:56, so we have 4 minutes. There are like 3 more questions here that we would like to answer. So one of the question is, so someone who is maybe a junior, right, in academia, and changes marital status, and is thinking about changing names. How do you think changing last names, when you change your marital status or for whatever other reason, how do you think that affects, your identity, if any?
I can,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's a great question. I do think it's not insurmountable. I think that it is possible, for example, to change your name and have a very, success with being recognized with your new name. I have to say though, it is something that I considered because I got married in grad school and ended up I didn't end up taking my husband's name anyways, but it's something that I thought about. I thought about if I did, which name would I use? Should I start, so as I said, it didn't end up being relevant because I kept my name, but honestly, it was a little bit of a reason why I did. It was another reason why to keep my own name because I'd already, kind of started to establish myself as Irwin. So I'm sympathetic to the question. I don't know that I have a great answer.
If I may add to that, because
Of
I
course.
have 2 last names in my name, if y'all can
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
So for me, if I could do it all over again, I would just be Seanicaa Edwards, because I had already established myself. And then once I got married, I went by Seanicaa Herron. And then people would always ask me, are you the same Seanicaa Edwards? Or, so then I just started, using my middle name as my maiden name and in parentheses. If you go to my LinkedIn, that's the way that it shows up, just because any publications, anything that I had done well into my career was under Seanicaa Edwards. And so then it's almost like you're reestablishing brand equity, because people know you as this person in this name. And then you come with a different name and it's like, oh, are you the same person? And you just have to go through a lot. It's not insurmountable, as Elena said, but it is something to think about when you're, professionally, you have to think about those things. But I mean, you can overcome it. If it's in the beginning and you want to, it's no big deal. Even if you're farther along like I was, it's no big deal. It just depends on like what you want to do and how you want to show up. If you want to continually have to tell people, yes, it's me, I got married, and you don't care, it's fine. But it is something that you need to think about professionally, your brand.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have an opinion on this, but I do.
Of course, sure.
I agree. It's not insurmountable. I know people who've done it successfully. Give some real thought to how people search your name. I come at this honestly. It is impossible to search for David Just because there are billions of people named David, and a lot of them have just recently done something, and the internet talks about it. So it doesn't, it's meaningless to search David Just. You have to put my middle initial in order to get me. And so name actually makes a difference in the way people can find you.
Yeah, like SEO, right? So there are a lot of additional questions, right? That we like at least 3 or 4 that we have here in the panel, but we've run out of time, at least for this panel. I don't know if Satya, what do you usually do? We call it a day, or do we stay longer? And
You're the boss. If the panelists have a few more minutes, maybe we can try to get to. There are 2 questions in here. If we can get to them, maybe quick responses and then wrap up.
okay,
Your call, Jamille.
okay. If are you available, or you have to go?
I'm available.
I have a few minutes and then I'll have to run.
Okay, David.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So what are some of the questions here, Satya? We have, all right. So one is, what are some ideas you can provide on using AI for developing your brand? So I think Seanicaa brought up the social media and the technology aspect of branding. So any ideas on?
I would say don't use AI to help develop your
Oh.
brand. I would say develop your brand based off of your own authentic values.
Mhm.
AI should be used as a tool, but you shouldn't use it to help develop who you are, because you already know
Gotcha.
who you are
Yeah.
and you know how you want to show up. Keep the end in mind. Now, if you're using it to tweak a paragraph, that's one thing, but I wouldn't use it as a way to define who you are. But again, that's my opinion. I think you should use it as a tool, but you are the person that is going to be able to tell us how you're going to show up in the world. And to do that authentically, I don't think AI has the ability to do that. But again, those are my own personal opinions. Use it as
Yeah.
a tool, but you are a key to
Mhm.
showing up as your authentic self.
Sure. Understood. Okay, so there is one question here on the chat. That's a new question. Oh, okay. Do you have any advice for branding yourself in a way that can speak to multiple audience, so not just one, kind of interdisciplinary spaces, applied policy in addition to your peers in, the ag-econ profession? And with this one, we are gonna wrap up. So go ahead.
I was just typing an answer to that. My answer is that I think this is where a particular focus on a particular problem or topic can be really helpful, right? If you say, I do water, that speaks to economists who are concerned about water issues. It also speaks to a wide variety of other disciplines or stakeholders who also are concerned with that topic. And so I think to me, that's like a really easy way to bridge those disciplinary or gaps across private versus public sector gaps. And in my case, I was able to do that just by saying, focus on land use, and that's an issue. That's a topic that appears in a lot of different disciplines.
Any additional comments from Seanicaa or David on that? Thank you, Elena.
Yeah, so I agree, and I will say I think that's a little more challenging if you're talking about different academic audiences than different audiences like academics versus policymakers versus industry somewhere. It's easier, it's easier to separate those audiences because they have different interests and they look at different things to try and figure out who you are and what you do. And so that can be a little bit simpler, and it's simply just identifying what it is they're interested in and shaping the way you're portrayed in their space. But interdisciplinary, that's a little harder from my point of view.
I think
Any 3 points? Just kidding.
I'm not gonna hold us with the 3 points, but I will say that, I don't think that it's impossible, but I would say maybe think about how you want to brand yourself singularly, meaning like in the question there are several different disciplines, some of which are on one end of the spectrum and the other end of the spectrum, and there may not necessarily be a commonality. However, as Elena said, finding a common problem or a common interest that speaks to all of them as much as possible may be a key, but it may be a key worth thinking about picking one. And if you're going to be talking in policy spaces, you're going to have to tweak that to the language and the jargon that's used there. Not necessarily stepping away from the branding as who you are, but because some of the audiences are so different, there may not be a way that there's some overlapping and you have one branding technique that you can utilize. You may have to have separate techniques and approaches depending on who your audience is.
Yeah, marketing differentiation, right? Like marketing to the different audiences accordingly, right? All right, well, thank you so much for all your insights, answering all the audience questions and the questions that we have prepared for you on helping us develop a brand identity for years to come. And thank you for the audience. We only have about 30 participants at this point, but at some point we had about 60 participants. So thank you all for being here and supporting CY.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you all.
The next CY panel will be on March 27th. So just a quick plug that the next panel is on March 27th, and we're going to be thinking about just CY as an organization, the history and where we move forward. So those interested, please watch out for that. And with that, thank you so much to all our panelists. And Jamille, thank you very much for organizing, leading, and moderating this seminar, the webinar. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jamille.
Thank you, Satya. Thank you, the leadership of CY.
Great to see you guys.